Salam, it's Maliha here. Welcome back to Quarantine Calligraphy. Today we're going to work on our letter shapes.
Whoopsies, wrong clip. Let's do that again.
Salam, it's Maliha here. Welcome back to Quarantine Calligraphy. Today we're going to be working on our letters. So grab whatever you're going to be using for your calligraphy, whether that's a dip pen, a marker, or a brush pen, and I'll talk you through what paper and templates we're going to be using today. Let's get started. So today we're going to be working on letter forms, and I've got some sheets for you that you'll be able to download and print off. These are lowercase letters as well as uppercase letters, and we'll go through a few of them. Once you have these sheets, you can just print multiple copies of them and just keep using them as practice. And remember, if you're using markers, you can print on regular paper. If you're using a dip pen, then you're going to need smoother paper like the Rhodia dot pad. But what's really useful with this paper is actually you can see through it. So you can print on your regular paper and then write with your dip pen on the Rhodia. So we'll start with the Pentel brush like we did last time. I've got blue this time. So what you're going to want to do is follow the dots. So the dot is where you're going to be starting, and that indicates your first stroke, and then this is your second stroke. So remember the shapes that I told you to practice and that we were working on last time. You'll see that these are similar. So this is your half semicircle or your circle if you go all the way up. So you have no pressure, pressure, no pressure, and then this is pressure, no pressure, pressure, no pressure. Okay, now you'll notice I can't follow the entire line because I have a thinner brush, but you'll see with the Crayola, because it's got a thicker brush, you'll be able to follow the whole shape. If I was to follow this as it is, it would be far too disjointed and not look like a regular letter, if you see. So you're going to do your thin, thick, thin, thick. Let's give it a go with the Crayola. So I've got green today. The tip of the pen for the thin strokes and the side for the thick. So I'm thick, thin, thick, thin. All right, you'll see I did that in one motion. I'll show you again slower. So you're going to go thin, thick, thin. All right, and the next stroke is your thick to thin. So we practiced these shapes last time, and you're just going to be joining them together. So we have the oval, and then right next to it you're going to do your thick to your thin. So you'll see that the shapes start to look like the letters you're working on. I'll do it one more time. Thin, thick, thin, thick, thin. All right, so that's the letter A, and I'll just show you real quick with the dip pen. So we're going to do, and this is going to be smaller because again it's a much smaller nib. We're going to do thin, thick, thin, thick, thin. Yeah, so this shape plus this shape, and as you practice it and your muscle memory starts to build for this, you'll be able to put your letters together much faster and in one motion. Oh, I must have pulled a hair here, so I'm just gonna dip again, do a bit of a trial to see that it's okay. Yep, and then go again. Okay, so you'll see with calligraphy, my normal A would be like this, but we're not doing our normal A's, we're thinking about the shapes that are going in. So for it to look nicer, we're going to have a slightly higher second part of the letter, because that allows us to join with other letters. So you can do it with slight variations. And as you practice, you'll find your own style. So these are just examples that I'm giving you, rather than this is the only way you can write these letters. So we'll move on and we'll do B, C, D, E, and F, and then I'll do the same with dip pen, and we'll go page by page. So again, follow the dots. Let me move this out of the way. So follow the dots. We're going to go thin up, thick down, thin up, thick down, thin. I'll show you again. Thin up, thick, thin, thick, thin. All right, one more time. Thin, thick, thin, thick, thin. Okay, let's give it a go with the Crayola. So I'm going to tilt my paper slightly. You might find tilting also helps you as well. Remember, we're thinking about the shapes in the letter. So if you need to turn your paper or your pen, you're more than welcome to. Just be careful with the dip pen. Obviously, if you turn your paper too much, your hand might end up smudging your ink. So let's do this. We're going to do thin, thick, thin, thick, and thin. So we've got thin, thick, thin, thick, and thin. Do it one more time. Thin, thick, thin, thick, and thin. All right. If you prefer, you can make these bits join closer together, because like I said, this is just an example of how you can do it. So you can make them joined closer together. And now we'll continue to the next letter. So you've got your C, which should be a nice simple one for us because it's part of our warm-ups. Yep, so just thin, thick, thin again. Let's do it with the Crayola marker. Thin, thick, thin again, thin, thick, thin again. And just a reminder that the thick comes from the pressure and the thin comes from low pressure, and with the marker it's also to do with the tilt of how you're using it. Let's move on to D. Thin, thick, thin, and then they show you for this one, because you're going to do a bit of a flourish, you're going to come across to finish the letter off. So we're going to start here, thin, thick, and thin again. So can you see how we have the letter D? So we're thinking about the shapes rather than the letter itself, because when we write our D's normally, we wouldn't go in two shapes like that. So remember that when you're going to practice. So we'll do our first round shape. So you have your thick on the outside, and then we're going to start from the tail and come into the body, and you want it to overlap here to join in with the rest of the D. So we're going to go thin, thick, and thin. All right, and let's try it with the marker. Same concept. Thin, thick, thin, thin across, thick down, and thin round. Thin for the swirl, thick for the body, thin for the tail. Let's do it one more time. Thin, thick, thin. The faster you go with it at the beginning, the less precise you'll be. But when you build up that muscle memory, it becomes much easier to go faster. So you'll see my wobbly lines because I'm trying to go slower. And that's fine when you're practicing to have those wobbly lines. The aim is to have a nice smooth line and flow. And that only comes with lots and lots of practice with all these different mediums. So let's move on to the E, back to the Pentel brush. This one is nice and simple. We're going to start with a thin, go into a thick, and end on a thin. Thin, thick, thin. So a bit like our letter C, but with an extra bit to make the E. You'll see I've added a tail here. That's how I would naturally do it. I'd add a bit of a tail, and I think I would also do a much rounder E. So you can start changing things up once you've got the hang of it. And let's try it with the Crayola marker. So we have thin, thick, thin, thin, thick, thin, thin, thick, thin. All right, and let's do F. And once we've finished with the F, we'll move on to the dip pen to do the same letters. So with F, you'll see that we've got the main body in one motion and then the cross. So let's do that. We've got thin, thick, and across. Thin, thick, and across. Thin, thick, and across. So you'll see that the tail is getting slightly thinner at the end and the crossover. And I'll show you again with the Crayola markers. So we have thin, thick, and across. Thin, thick, and across. And one more time. Okay, so that's it with the letter F. And I'll show us the same things but with the dip pen. So what we have is we've got our A's. With our B's, we're going to go thin up. I'll just check the ink is working. Yep, we're going to go thin up, heavy down, thin, heavy, and out. Do it again. And one more time. Thin up, thick down, thin up, thick, and around. All right, B. C is just like the trials and the practices that we do. So just thin, thick, and thin to end. Yeah. D, I'll show you how we do it here with the flourish, is you'll do the body, which is just your round, and then we start thin, loop back on ourselves to do a thick, and finish up. Okay, so let's join that together to make the D. We've got the body, and the thin, the thick, and the finish. I'll do it one more time to show you. We'll do the body, which is the O. We'll do thin, loop round, thick, and finish. Okay, so that's D. E, very similar to the C. We're going to go thin, round, thick, and finish. Or you could do it just like that. So with your thin, heavy, and round. All right, so very, very similar to the C.
So now for the F, what we're going to do is we're going to follow the template. We're going to go up, thick down, loop around, and then draw a line through. Let's do that again. Flick up, thick down, loop around, and put a line through. Let's do one more. So we're going to go thin up, thick down, loop around, and a thin line through. We'll try it one more time. This is just a starting point. You can have variations. So we're going to go thin up, thick down, and do our little line through.
And you can always look on Pinterest for loads and loads of fonts and calligraphy letter sheets, and you can practice, see what they look like, give it a go, see if you like that style, if you like bits of it, if you don't like any of it and you want to try something else. One of the nice things about calligraphy is that once you have the basics and you've seen some of the styles, you can start to build your own. So let's move on to the next sheet. So we'll F, I might be on the wrong page. We need FG. Here we go. So on this page we have D, G, H, I, J, and K. You'll see they have some nice little wispy bits to them. We call them flourishes. These are really nice and simple and is a nice way to get started. So we'll use the Pentel brush pen, and I'll do maybe 2 of each. We'll do G, H, I, J, K, and then we'll do it with the dip pen. So with this, as you can see, we've got the body, so thin, thick, thin, and then we're just looping around with a thin, thick down, and then around here you're releasing your pressure, and we're doing a thin flourish to finish. So what you're doing is the thick and then up to the thin, a thin to bring up a bit of a line here, thick down, release your pressure around here, and just do a thin swirl. I'll do it once more with you to show you. Thin, thick, thin, and you can go over it too if you want. Thin, and then thick, down, and flourish. Now remember, I was saying that this is a thicker marker and the Pentel is quite a thin one, so we should be able to get the thickness with the Crayola. But what you want to be working on is just having a difference between the thin and the thick when you have your up and your down strokes. And if you want to go over it again to make it slightly thicker, you absolutely can. Let's try it with the Crayola. So we're going to do the same thing. Start here for the body. So we're going to go thin, thick, thin, thin, thick, and then a thin for the flourish. All right, let's do it one more time. Thin, thick, thin, thin, thick down, release pressure, and flourish. Okie dokie. Let's move on to H. So we're going to start thin. Look here, so what we're going to work towards, we're going thin, thick, thin, thick, and thin out. So we've got thin, thick, thin, thick, and thin out. Thin, thick, thin, thick, and thin out. All right, let's do it with the Crayola. You've got thin, thick, thin, thick, and thin out. All right, one more time. Thin, thick, thin, thick, and thin out. Yeah, so let's try it with the I, J, and the K. So that you'll see I was doing thick and then releasing pressure at this point to get the thin. All right, J, similar idea with the I, but you're going in the opposite direction. Okay, so we're going to go thick, and then a bit like the G, we're going to flourish through, thick, and then flourish through. And the dots, I always forget the dots. And let's do the same with the Crayola marker. So thick, thick. So I'm putting pressure and then I'm changing my pen angle for the J. And let's do K. So we're going to start here, do the thin, the thick down, the thin, the thick, and the thin. All right, so thin, thick, and then here I'm going thin, thick, thick, thin, thin, then thick down, then taking my pen off the paper, starting here, thin, thick, thin to loop, thick back down, and thin to go up. Let's do it with the Crayola. Thin to thick, pen off, thin, thick, thin to loop, thick back down, and thin up. One more time. Thin to thick, pen up, thin, thick, a thin loop, thick back down, and thin up. All right, let's give it a go with the dip pen. So you'll see how the variations in the thickness, because obviously the dip pen is thinner, then you have the Pentel brush, and then you've got the Crayola. But with all of them, you can create the thin and the thick effect that you have in calligraphy. So let's start with the G, the body of it. Yeah, so let's do it exactly as they have here. The thin, thick, thin body, the thin loop, thick down, start to release pressure, and the rest of it is thin because I'm going upwards. Okay, I'll do it one more time. Yeah, all right, let's try H. So we're going thin up, thick down, thin up, thick down, and thin to flick. Yep, thick down, thin up, thick and flick. So remember, all the practices that we do with the basic strokes help build that muscle memory to get the thin and the thick, so then you can concentrate in putting them together. So we're doing thin and thick for the body of the H, thin line up, thick down and flick. That's our H. I is nice and simple. We're going thick down and thin up, thick down and thin up. But remember, you're releasing pressure 3/4 of the way down so that you can have a nice smooth transition. I. J is the opposite direction. So thick down and up, thick down and thin up and thin up. All right, so that's our letter J. And with K, we're going to go thin up and thick down. And then from this bit, we're going to start again, go thin, thick, thin, thick, and thin up. Start that again. We're going to do thin and thick. And then here we're going to go thin, thick, thick, and thin back up. You can make this longer if you want. K is one of the trickiest letters for me to write. I find it quite hard. But that's probably all the more why I should be practicing it. So I'll do it one more time. Okay, so I've got the thin, thick. I'm going to go here. Thin, thick, thin, thick, and up. Okay, so that's the letter K. Let's move on to the next sheet, which is L, M, N, O, P, Q, R. There we go. So we'll start with the pentel. We have thin up and thick down and thin up. Okay, and we'll do the same with the Crayola. L. As you get to these later letters in the alphabet, you realize that a lot of the techniques that you're using are quite similar. The transitions, the loops, it all repeats itself quite a lot. So M is thick down, thin up, thick down, thin up, thick down. So this one is a lot like the practice basic stroke that we do, where you're just making those bumps. Okay, and we'll do that with the Crayola. So you'll see with this one, I'm taking it much slower. There you go. And, oh, one more. Thick, thin, thick, thin, thick, and up to thin. The N. Down thick, up thin, down thick, up thin, down thick, thin, down, thick, up, thin. Okay, let's do it with the Crayola. Thick, thin, thick, thin. All right, letter O. O is a nice one because it's just round. So you can do your thick down, thin up, loop, and flick it out. Thick down, thin up, loop, and flick it out. Yeah, let's do it with the Crayola. So we're putting pressure, no pressure, to loop out. Pressure, no pressure, and loop out. Okay. With P, we've got our downward stroke, so that's thick. And then we're going to go thin up, thick down, and thin to do the flick. Thick down, which is the body, thin up, thick down, and thin to do the flick. Alright, so thick down, thin up, thick down, and thin to do the flick. Let's do it with the Crayola. So I'm doing thick down, thin up, thick down, and thin to do the flick. Thick down, thin, thick, and flick. Alright, so that's P. Q is like the semicircles we used to do before, very basic one. Thick down, thin up, and then thick and thin. So we're going to do our semicircle, and you can go up, and then thick over yourself, back down and up. Semicircle and flick. Let's do it with the Crayola. So you've got the tip of the pen, thick and thick down and flick. Okay. And with R in calligraphy, it's not written like the usual R that you might have in your handwriting, because that's really difficult to join to other letters. And so this R is more of a cursive R and can take a little bit of creativity to see the R in it when you first start, but it joins really well in your calligraphy writing, and people can make out it's an R. So let's try and get the shape. You've got the loop, and then it's heavy down again, and thin flick up. We're doing the loop, heavy down again, and then the flick. So with the Crayola, I'm using the tip of the pen, heavy down again, and thin flick. All right, and one more. Okay, so what we'll do now is put these to the side and do it with the dip pen. So we have our L, so that's thin, thick, and thin again, and you can make it as wide as you like down here, or as thin or as rounded, it's up to you. And a lot of these letters, bear in mind, when you do them by themselves, they look a bit funny, the proportions aren't right, but when you join them to another a letter to make a word, it'll start to come together a lot more. So right now we're just practicing the kind of shapes that we need to make these different letters, but we'll change the height of them, the width of them, the angle when it comes to putting them together with other letters in a word. So that's L. M, you've got thick, thin, thick, thin, thick. All right, we'll do that again. So I'm just changing my pressure, but the shape I'm doing is just up and down. Okay, M. N is just thick, thin, thick, and flick. Okay, N. O is our circle, so pressure, no pressure, and flick. Pressure, no pressure, and flick. Okay. With P, I'm going down, so that's pressure. You can either go back on yourself or take your pen off and start here to finish the rest of it off. So you've got pressure, no pressure, pressure, no pressure. Okay, so that's P. Q is our semicircle, and then down with the pressure, up with no pressure, and flick. Our semicircle, up, down with the pressure, no pressure, and flick. Semicircle, down with the pressure, release the pressure, and flick. And R, we're going to loop up, down, down again, and flick. I'll show that with a little bit more space. So we're looping up, down pressure, like a mini E, pressure, like a little bit of an I, and flick. All right, so see here they have a loop, but in dip pen, when the loop becomes quite narrow, what it ends up looking like is just a bit of a line rather than a loop. Okay, so that's your R. Let's move back to the sheets to see the rest of the letters. So here we have S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. I'll do them with the dip pen, with the brush pen, the Crayola, and then the dip pen. So with S, we're going to start at the top, thin, thick, thin, and flick. And I'll do it with the Crayola. So tip of the pen, body of the pen, back to the tip. Okay. And then we'll do T. T is nice and simple. You're going to do thick, thin, and crossover. Thick, thin, and crossover. Thick, thin, and crossover. Let's do that with the Crayola. Thick, thin, and crossover. Okay, so now we're going to move on to U. You're going to go thick down, round, thin up, thick down, and thin to flick. Thick down, rounded up, thick down again, and thin to flick. Remember, all of your upstrokes are thin. Let's do it with the Crayola. Thick down, thin up, pressure down again, and thin up to flick. Thick down, thin up, pressure, and up to flick. Okay, so we'll move on to our V. You're going to go thick down, thin up, a little loop and a flick. Thick down, thin up, a little loop and a flick. Thick down, thin up, a little loop and a flick. And you'll get a little bit of a thickness there in your loop because you're moving downwards again. And I just want to draw your attention to the similarities between the U and the V. So V has a pointed down, whereas the U has a more rounded underside. And you'll see how the U is quite similar to the W, where you just have the thick down, thin up, thick down, and the flick. The U's have the rounded bottom, like I was saying, and the V have a bit more of a sharpness
there underneath in comparison to the U. So let's move back to the Crayola. Thick down, thin up and flick, thick down, thin up and flick. And now on to the W. So we have thick to thin, thick to thin and a flick, thick to thin, thick to thin and a flick. You'll see how they're quite similar. And with the Crayola marker, so whenever you see a thick line, that's where you're going to be putting pressure, and the distinctiveness in calligraphy comes from the thick and the thin lines. So we'll move on to X, which is thin, thick, thin, and then just a line down. Thin, thick, thin, and just a line down. So you can put pressure on that. Thin, thick, thin, and just a line down. We'll do that with the Crayola. So thin, thick, thin, and just a line down. Okay, and we'll do Y. So thick, thin, thick, and thin up, thick, thin, thick, and thin up. There are lots of different ways you can do your Ys, but the basic, I don't like this one. So what I tend to do when I'm practicing is I'll cross it out. And if there are ones that I particularly like quite a lot, I'll circle them, and they're the ones I'll try to replicate. So we'll do thin, thick, thick, and thin up. Let's do it with the Crayola so I can show you. Thick, thin, thick, and thin, thick, thin, thick, and thin. Alright, so that's Y. And we'll just do Z. So Z starts thin, goes thick, thick again, and thin up. Thin, thick, thick, and thin up. So this is not your sideways Z. The same way with the R, they've made, like, use a more cursive one in calligraphy just so that you can join it together. So this would be thin, thick, thin, thick, and up. And I'll show you with the Crayola marker. Thin, thick, thin, thick, and thin up. These flicks that we do help them join up to other letters. So when we start to put them into words, you'll see why the lines are useful. Okay, so Z. And we'll do that with the dip pen. Alright, so we reached R. We have thin, thick, thin for S. S. You can do it bigger if you want. S. S. Alright, let's do T. So that's thick down, thin up, and crossover. Okay. U. So thick, thin, thick, and a flick. And a flick. U. V is a bit sharper, so you're going to go thick, up, and a flick. Thick, thin, and a flick. Okay, V. W. Very similar to your U. You're going to go down, up, and a flick. Okay, so the difference here is I left a bit more space. See this up? There's a bit more space here. And with this one, I made it even wider.
All right, so the way you change the width, the height, the spacing will change how your letters look as well. X, thin, thick, thin with a line through. Okay, X. Y is going to be thick, thin, thick, and thin up. Thin up, thick, thin, thick, and thin up. And Z is thin, thick, thin, thick, and up. One more time, thin, thick, and up. So now that you've seen some of the letters, I'll just give you some brief examples of words because we're going to focus more on that next time. So for example, you can see all the alphabet here. If I was to write my name, I'd have the M, I'd have the A, I'd have the L, I'd have the I, I'd have the H, need more ink, and I'd have the A. Now what these lines are going to help me with is join them together. So we're going to have M, A, L, I, H, and A. Okay, so that's what we're going to do more of in our next session. I've also given these uppercase worksheets, which are exactly the same as what we've done, but with the capital letters. You can follow the dots to see where to start and follow the shape through. Think about what the thick lines are and what you need to do to recreate them and how you can maintain the thin and the thick difference. This will be a nice little homework or practice for you guys to do. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you'll join me again next time. For now, keep practicing, stay home, and stay safe. Good Hafiz!